The college football playoff bracket has broken the already fragile brains of SEC fans. I called it a few weeks ago. Some of their best teams fell short in games they shouldn't have lost, and it came back to haunt the conference in terms of how many teams they got into the college football playoff. And this has not gone over well in Dixieland and or Texas.
Look, Patrick, I'm Texas. Howdy, y'all.
I'm Texas, too.
Howdy, y'all.
Get a dog, little Arnie. Get a dog.
Howdy, y'all.
It's gotten so bad, I have people in my comments saying Vanderbilt would run the table in the Big 12 or the ACC. I mean, come on. But before you leave, SEC fans, this is in many ways my SEC concession, because there are some very valid concerns you have about how the bracket shook out in its final stages. So I thought the best way to do this was to figure out how the CFP did this in the most scientific way possible. Unfortunately, this is not the BCS, so we don't have the computer polls and we don't have a formula of the AP or the coaches poll. What we do have is a council of old men that come together for 6 top 25 polls in the college football season, and of that they pull a 12-team bracket that becomes the college football playoff. However, the committee does have some stated data points that they are supposed to base their decisions off of, so let's just hear it straight from the horse's mouth and we'll go from there. So this is straight from the college football playoff website. The selection committee ranks the teams based on the members' evaluation of the team's performance on the field using conference championships won, strength of schedule, head-to-head results, and comparison of results against common opponents to decide among teams that are comparable. Okay, so this seems pretty straightforward. We're looking at 4 data points: conference championships, strength of schedule, head-to-head results, and results versus common opponents. I do want to point out 2 things, however. One is the last part. So it's to decide among teams that are comparable. So does this mean that this whole statement that they've put out is only to talk about teams that are comparable, or is it to talk about all 25 teams that are ranked? And if it is the former, who decides which teams are comparable? The second thing is teams' performance on the field. I originally took this as an additional 5th data point, but when you really look at it, it seems to be that they're using the other 4 data points to evaluate the performance on the field. So they're only basing the rankings off of 1 data point that can be used across all of college football, which is strength of schedule. And now that's really interesting because I've been doing a lot of research, and one of the craziest things about strength of schedule, they use the same thing they use in the NFL. They're basing it off of last year's win-loss record. Okay? So if you really look at that, that's a super flawed measurement to be basing everything off of. Because if you just look at what's happening in the NIL era, you can see where the problem is, okay? Let's look at Washington and Michigan. Both of these teams were in the national championship last year. Michigan had an undefeated season. Washington beat the Ducks twice and have 2 losses on the entire season, including their national championship loss. Washington's 6-6 this year, and Michigan is 7-5. So why should teams that are playing Washington and Michigan this year be getting credit in their strength of schedule ranking for playing the 2 teams in the national championship last season? And on the other side of that coin, you have teams like Indiana and Colorado. Indiana is undoubtedly one of the best teams in the country this season and have won 11 games. You can talk shit all you want about Indiana's schedule and all that, but only 10 teams in the country have won 11 games, including the conference championship games. And you're telling me that teams are getting credit for playing Indiana's 2023 3-9 team if they go play against Indiana? Where does that make sense? And then Colorado, they went from 4-8 last season to 9-3. They have 86 new players on the team. That is almost an entirely new team. Why would they get credit for playing last year's 4-8 team? A side note, which also kind of talks about how much college football is changing. Colorado and BYU are going to play each other in the Alamo Bowl this season. 2 teams from the same conference, from the Big 12, which, yes, neither of them were in the Big 12 last season either. They're playing against each other in a bowl game. If you still think that college football has anything to do with what we were watching 5 years ago, you are so wrong. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been a college football channel. I don't really want to be that. I want to talk about the sports business. I want to talk about everything that's going on, that's changing in sports. But the biggest stories in sports business right now, everything is centered around college football. It's absolutely the most interesting thing. This is going places that we could have never imagined. And I'm afraid that it's going somewhere that the people that are in the leadership of the sport don't know where it's going. They maybe don't even have an idea of what they want it to go to. It's just whatever can make the most money.
He doesn't like to discuss money.
I don't like to discuss money.
But if you're interested in the business of sport and whatever the fuck is going on with college football, make sure that you like and subscribe. We'll keep it coming for you. Strength of schedule seems like it'd be a great baseline stat to kind of compare teams. But as we looked at with just 4 teams, you can see how flawed of a stat that can be. Regardless of that, it's the only stat the CFP says that they're using that can be spread across all teams in college football. And if we're going to be scientific about the CFP rankings that came out for this year's college football playoff, then we're going to have to go with the strength of schedule because that's what the CFP says they're using. So let's just use the ESPN ranking since the CFP is in bed with ESPN, and we'll look at the top 16 because Clemson is number 16 and they're somewhat stupidly in this field. And for all you Clemson fans that are about to be in my comments, just remember that I said somewhat stupidly. But if you got something to say, leave it in the comments. We're down to clown.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so on the screen now, you'll see all those rankings, the top 16 in order with their strength of schedule ranking based on ESPN's current strength of schedule rankings. And we'll come back to this screen as we go. As you saw, the title of this video is Notre Dame is the biggest problem with the CFP bracket. So let's just base this all around Notre Dame and compare them to the other teams in the field to figure out what the committee was thinking. So let's just pick apart the science a little bit. We'll start with the 2 teams ranked directly below Notre Dame, Ohio State and Tennessee. Both those teams have played a schedule 30 spots higher than Notre Dame's strength of schedule ranking of 58. Both teams have a loss to a top 2 team in the country, as well as a conference loss to a team outside of the top 25. Ohio State has 2 top 10 wins, while Tennessee has a win against number 12 Alabama. Okay, so now let's look at Notre Dame. Notre Dame has 1 win against a team currently ranked in the CFP top 25, and that win was Army, who's number 22 and the AAC champ. They also have by far the worst loss of any playoff team or any top 16 team when they lost to Northern Illinois at home on September 7th. For context, Northern Illinois is 7-5. They didn't play any other games against Power 4 conference teams. And really, when you look at Notre Dame, they're not a Power 4 conference team, but for whatever reason, they get treated like they are. So let's break down each team directly. Ohio State, without the loss to Michigan, is clearly a higher ranked team than Notre Dame. There's no way that you can argue that they're not. They've gone 2-1 in top 10 matchups this year, and 2 of those matchups were on the road. And let's just look at that Michigan loss versus the NIU loss, okay? Michigan has been in 4 top 10 matchups this season, plus a top 25 matchup against Illinois. So in all of their top 25 games, they're 1-4 in those games. So like NIU, at the end of the day, their record is 7-5. However, 4 of those losses came against top 25 teams, and they have a win against a top 10 team, just like NIU. Looking at that resume, you obviously know that Michigan is a better team than NIU. So then how is Notre Dame ranked higher than Ohio State? They must be saying that the difference between an 11-1 team and a 10-2 team makes them uncomparable. Because based on the committee statements, if there were comparable teams, then we have to go through the exercise of the 4 data points that they're looking at to differentiate comparable teams. Conference champions, neither is applicable. Head-to-head results, they didn't play. Results versus common opponents, there's only 1 common opponent between them. 1-11 Purdue. Notre Dame beat them 66-7. Ohio State beat them 45-0. Strength of schedule, Notre Dame is ranked 59th. Ohio State is ranked 29th. So if we're just looking through the stated lens of the committee with comparable teams, who do you take? To me, the 30 spots difference in strength of schedule, if we're just comparing the 4 data points, the 30 spots difference in strength of schedule is more important than beating Purdue, again, a 1-11 team, by 59 points instead of 45. That means that the committee is not looking at these 2 teams as comparable. They're saying that an additional loss, even though it was to the number 1 team in the nation, on the road, in a game that they probably should have pulled off in the end. I'm a Ducks fan. They probably should have pulled that off in the end. Cannot be made up with, even with 2 top 10 wins, one of which was on the road. And all of that is saying that the Michigan loss and the NIU loss are the same. They're saying that let's make that equal, which is a stretch in and of itself, a big stretch in and of itself. So let's just keep going down the list and let's look at Tennessee. But we got some stuff to come back to on this one as we get later on in the video. Okay, well, Ohio State clearly has 2 better wins than Notre Dame. You could argue that Notre Dame's best win against Army would be Tennessee's second best win. And Arkansas, who is Tennessee's worst loss and is 6-6 versus NIU's 7-5, there's probably a toss-up maybe at the most. But again, I think 9 out of 10 people that are looking at it from an unbiased lens would say that Arkansas is a better team and therefore a better resume loss than what happened with NIU and Notre Dame early in the season. So let's take it to the comparable teams lens. Conference champion, again, neither. Head-to-head results, they didn't play. There are no common opponents either. So the only thing we have is strength of schedule. Notre Dame, again, 59, Tennessee, 28. When you break down this lens, it is crazy that these are the 4 data points you're going after. Of all the other things that we're looking at, these are the 4 data points you're going after for comparable teams with no other information about what is putting teams in the ranking in the first place. But with that, between these two teams, there's only one stat that is applicable, and that's strength of schedule. Tennessee is actually 31 spots higher in terms of that stat. So again, similar to Ohio State, they're saying that a loss to a top 2 team on the road cannot be made up for even with a win against a top 12 team. Not only does it not outweigh the loss, they are still saying that Tennessee is not comparable to Notre Dame. Maybe it's a momentum thing, similar to what happened with Florida State last season when they went undefeated and didn't get a spot in the 14 playoff. Okay, Tennessee lost 3 weeks before conference championship week, so maybe the lesson from these 3 teams that we're looking at is it's not about how many losses or who you lost to, but it's also about the timing of the loss. Keep that in mind as we go forward and as we look at Indiana, who is Notre Dame's first round opponent in the playoff, and I think the most comparable team when you look at their resumes. Indiana is one of 3 teams in the bracket that has no wins against a team that's currently ranked in the CFP top 25. Wait till the state of Texas finds out who the other 2 are.
Dog, little longy, get a dog.
So Notre Dame has the upper hand when it comes to that, as they have a better win in their top 25 win against Army. But on the other hand, Indiana's loss at Ohio State is much better than Notre Dame's loss that we'll continue to harp on because it's the craziest outlier in the entire field. But anyways, let's do it one more time and let's go over the comparable team scope, as these 2 teams are both 11-1. Neither are conference champions, no head-to-head games. They have, again, the same common opponent, Purdue, the 1-11 team. Everyone's fucking beat Purdue. Notre Dame, 66-7. Indiana, 66-0. Strength of schedule, Notre Dame, 59. Indiana, 67. You could make an argument of who's the best, right? There's not a huge difference between these 2 teams. Both are 11-1. Both killed Purdue. Indiana did win by more and didn't give up any points. Both have strength of schedules around 60. So you could say that Notre Dame gets the advantage based off the 8-spot difference in the strength of schedule rankings. But does that make a 3-spot difference in the rankings? So a lot of talk around these rankings has been about the committee valuing who you lost to over who you beat. And that's a lot of been by Nick Saban and SEC teams. But in this situation, it looks like the opposite is happening. The Irish's win over Army, which is the only thing that's holding their resume up outside of their 11-1 record, is being valued and outweighing Indiana's loss at Ohio State. So, like I said, is this a momentum thing? Because Indiana's loss happened 2 weeks before conference championship week. Is recency bias the difference between the 5 rank and the 6, 7, and 8 rank? We'll go back to it. Notre Dame has undoubtedly the worst loss of any playoff team, but it happened in September. It happened in week 2. And they had their best win, which again is a fringe top 25 team with one of the worst schedules in the country, the second to last week of the season. So does that mean that because they had their best win later on in the season, while other teams had bad losses or losses in general later on in the season, does that mean that Notre Dame had a better season or is more deserving of a higher rank? In the individual arguments, it's still hard to see why Notre Dame is above Ohio State and Tennessee. But how can you put Notre Dame above Ohio State and Tennessee and not put Indiana above Ohio State and Tennessee if you're using the same arguments? If you're going to say that Notre Dame is number 5, Indiana is at least 7, if not 6. Only reason they're 7 is because they lost to Ohio State. That all goes back to the question I was asking earlier, which is who's deciding which teams are comparable? If we want to know, we got to keep digging and see if we can find some more information as we go deeper down the list. And SEC fans, you hold on. I'm getting to those 3 last teams. I just got to build this argument up. Indiana, Boise State, SMU, Notre Dame, Texas, and Penn State all have 11-1 records in the regular season. Only Notre Dame, Penn State, and Boise State have current top 25 wins of that group. And if we can't figure out why Notre Dame has a 3-spot advantage over Indiana, then we really got to figure out why they have a 4-spot advantage over Boise State. Boise State has a top 25 win in the conference championship week against UNLV. They have 12 wins to Notre Dame's 11. Their only loss is on the road against the best team in the country by 3 points on the same day that Notre Dame lost at home to NIU. The only advantage that Notre Dame has is they have the 59th hardest schedule versus Boise's 78. Does that combine with a win against a team ranked 2 spots higher? UNLV is 24, Army is 22. Does that account for 4 spots in the ranking? So if we're looking through the comparable teams lens, there's no head-to-head and there's no common opponents. But Boise State is a conference champion, which is the first thing that they say comparing between teams. And they probably have the second best loss in the country behind Ohio State's. And they have an additional win over what Notre Dame has. And then if we're talking about the strength of schedule, remember that that's based on last year's win-loss records, okay? So the 19-spot difference that Notre Dame has, that includes them getting credit for beating a 13-1 FSU team from last season. The FSU team that actually played this season is 2-10. So how does that change their strength of schedule when their best win is actually one of the worst teams they played? When you look at it, number 9 Boise State should not even be getting compared to Notre Dame. They're probably a better comparison with Texas or Penn State than they are with any of the other 3 in the group of 11-1 teams. Sure, they have the weakest strength of schedule in all the playoff, but just like Texas and Penn State, every time the bell has rang, they came and they answered it. They've won all the games against teams they should have beaten, and they lost to teams that they were worse than. But none of those teams got blown out. You could maybe even throw Indiana into that description, but they lost by like almost 20 points to Ohio State, so that's getting close to blowout territory. And I know Boise State gets a 3rd spot in the bracket, but when you really look at it, they should have been ranked higher regardless of their conference championship. All this to say, what makes Notre Dame the 5th best team in the country? You can convince me of all the other rankings. There's things that you can point at in all the other rankings. Maybe SMU, but you can look at all the other rankings and convince me of why they deserve to be there. But Notre Dame at 5 just doesn't make any sense. There's no logic you can spin out of what the committee's saying or looking at the other things that you could look as comparable between the teams that are below them or above them that makes Notre Dame number 5. To go along with that, you could convince me that Alabama or Ole Miss or South Carolina, those 3-loss SEC teams on the fringe there, should be in over SMU. There's reasonable arguments to be made for all of that, especially based on a lot of the things that we talked about earlier on in the video with those other teams. But really, it's Miami's fault that conversation's even needed to be had after they dropped 2 of their last 3 games. And Mario Cristobal has the fucking balls to talk about they need a spot in the playoffs. Mario Cristobal, this is what you wanted when you left Eugene. Are you happy with it?
Lazy, fatty, guardian, wee!
But all those conversations have a block. If we're trying to figure out what makes a playoff team or what the committee is valuing, Notre Dame at 5 is the issue in every single one of those arguments. They have the 3rd weakest schedule in the top 16. Along with Miami, they're the only 2 teams in the top 16 with no matchups against a current top 20 team in the CFP poll. They're the only team in the top 16 that has a loss against a G5 team. And 3 teams in the top 16 that are currently ranked below them have a win against a team that's in the top 5. And all of those teams in the top 5 are ranked above Notre Dame. So we're talking about a top 12. If you didn't make it, it's not like you have a great argument to say that you have a real solid shot to win the national championship. But we still have to go through these things because even one playoff game is huge for a program. It's huge to get that nationally televised game, massive bowl games, and you could go on a run. Ohio State, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, they all fell short in at least one game that they shouldn't have lost. But so did Notre Dame. The difference is that all of those teams also beat a playoff team, and none of those teams lost to a G5 team. If Alabama didn't absolutely disappear against Oklahoma or Ole Miss or South Carolina, who both lost to LSU, if they could have held on and beat LSU, they probably would have a spot in the playoff. But the problem is, with what we see with Tennessee and Ohio State, it's pretty obvious that none of those teams would be ranked above Notre Dame. And unless I'm just completely missing it, which let me know if I am. But this doesn't make any sense. So if we're just saying that what your regular season record is, you're going to be kind of stacked up based on your regular season record. And if you have the same regular season record as someone, then we'll look at those 4 data points. That's what comparable teams is. That still doesn't make sense. If that's the case, then Notre Dame, Indiana, Boise State, SMU, they should all be ranked above Ohio State and Tennessee because they all had better regular season records. Or if we're saying that there are bigger losses or bigger wins, then Ohio State, Tennessee, probably Boise State should all be ranked above Notre Dame. But that's not the case either. So the argument that the SEC fans have, and I told you I'd bring it back around, is why are we playing each other in games that are obviously more difficult than a lot of these teams are playing if it doesn't matter in the end? So maybe this year, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, they just dropped too many games they shouldn't have dropped, and that outweighed the bigger wins that they had than some of the teams above them. And maybe the CFP is just saying, you can't have 3 losses and make it into this when we have so many other teams with 1 or 2 losses. Okay, but if it's 2 losses, like we talked about, where is that line? Where's the difference? Because based on this ranking, based on the first 12-team bracket, it is very unclear. And if it's going to be so unscientific, I think we could have big changes coming. Because if I'm the SEC, or the Big Ten for that matter, and they don't make Notre Dame join a conference and stop this nonsense, or make a formula that gives us a numeric score for every team in the country, so there's no question as to why this team is ranked above that team, why this loss is valued more than that loss, and clear data points that show why the formula looks that way, then I'm not putting my teams in the same bracket. I'm not allowing you to make money off of my teams when you can't clearly tell me how good my teams are or how good the other teams are. Because again, based off of what happened this year, there is no clear directive for teams on, okay, you want to be a playoff team, this is what you need to schedule, this is how you need to play, this is what you need to do. There's no clear directive. It doesn't say that we're valuing big games. It doesn't say that we're valuing losses even though they were close. It doesn't say that we're taking out outlier losses. There's no clear directive. And if they do this again, we're headed to Armageddon. We're headed to an SEC, Big Ten playoff, and nobody else is allowed. So enjoy what we've got while it lasts, because with all the money that's now on the line with media, contracts, NIL, betting, revenue sharing that's coming up, this unscientific bullshit that we've been dealing with for this long that has found a way to bleed into the new form of college football, which by all other accounts is something completely new, but we're still ranking with this committee knowledge, with these council of beings that are going to tell us who's the best team, then we're going to change. If the CFP doesn't figure out how to change before it's too late, they're going to be gone. It's just going to be conferences running the thing, and we're going to have to watch what we get. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and if you've made it this far, maybe you have something to say, so leave a comment as well. If you'd like to watch more of my videos, I've got the one I posted last week right here, which is the 3 things that the CFP could change from a structural level. Up here, I've got my most popular video, over 11,000 views now. This one might get me monetized, so make sure you check it out. It's about conference realignment and specifically the SEC, so click on that up there. Other than that, if you just want to subscribe, I've got the subscribe link over there, and we'll check you next time. See ya!